All right, welcome everyone, Eugene Hughes Motorized. Okay, so this video is about that mysterious popping noise you hear coming from the back of your little motorized bicycle. I had that problem a time or two and I was like, what the heck's going on? And I looked down and I noticed that my chain here, let's say obviously this here is the bottom of the chain, is as the sprocket is rolling. See how the sprockets, it's not going in? Well, what's going on is, let's see if we can get it aligned here. The sprocket isn't aligned with the chain. You kind of hear that popping sound? So what's going on is the sprocket's trying to walk off the chain. It's getting real super tight, and you notice right before it makes that popping sound, it gets real hard to push and you hear that pop. Well, let's get the chain out of the way. Most often, particularly if you're using the good old rag joint, got the rag joint right here. We'll go into the details on that here in a second. What you quite possibly didn't do when you first built your bike was check for your side-to-side play, your run out on your sprocket. Now your chain, you've got the distance here between the plates here on the inside, and your sprocket wants to reside in that territory. Now if your wiggle room, your side-to-side play of your sprocket is any wider than this inside dimension here in your chain, that's where you're going to have problems. So another issue might be your chain tensioner. Your chain tensioner needs to line up centered with your sprocket. If your chain tensioner is kind of pushed one way or the other, it's going to be doing about the same thing. It's going to be trying to feed the chain on the bottom of it, and it's going to be trying to feed it off to one side or the other. And if you've got everything tight and snug, well, it's going to be hard for it to come off, but it will ultimately come off when you're running down the road, tearing ass through the neighborhood. But you just walking, you still may hear that popping sound as well. It's like right before it pops, it'll get real hard to push. So if it's the tensioner, we'll get into that in a second. If it is, you'll know what to do. You'll need to adjust your tensioner, but I'll go into that just a little bit more. So to check if you've got any run out on your sprocket, you're going to have some anyways here, but if it's any wider than that inside dimension on your chain, you're going to need to fix it, okay? So what you're going to need to do is take the chain off. Just break the chain, take the connecting link off, pull the chain off of your sprocket, lift the ass end of the bike up, and let's give it a spin. What I'll do is I'll take a screwdriver and I'll hold it on the frame of the bike, the seat stay. I'll hold it and I'll get it to where it just rubs against the sprocket here and give it a turn. And what I typically will find on a job, and I'll do that when I first install it, is the majority of it'll ride right against it, and then you'll find one area where it'll probably even just kind of want to push out, and then you go back and then you have a gap. So basically that one area where it's pushing out, what's going on? You need to tighten up the bolts here in the area where it's pushed out. Now typically I'll find that, let's say like if this one area here is where it's pushed out the most, I will tighten up, of course, that bolt and the one before it and the one after it. So you kind of want to pick the three and tighten it up, spin it again, just hold whatever tool you're going to use firmly against your frame, and you'll see. And just look at the gap, and in an area where it's pushing whatever you're holding out, that area needs to go back in. So once you get that solved, and you just basically, like I said, you want to get it to where your wiggle room is no wider than what you've got here on the inside of your chain. So a little bit of play when you spin it, just that little bit of gap here and there is going to be okay, as long as it's not wider than the inside of the chain there. Now, also, if you notice, sometimes if you're pushing the bike and the chain gets real tight and then it gets loose, tight and loose, well, and that would be because you didn't center it on the wheel. Okay? And what it is basically your sprocket is rotating in like an egg-shaped pattern. Okay? You want to make sure that that thing is dead nut centered with respect to the center line of your axle. If it's off that little bit, and I'm exaggerating here, but if it's off, your sprocket's going to be doing the wobbly thing, and that's not good for the chain. Now, one thing I hope you checked, one thing you want to check, it's most important when you're installing it, because you have to take everything apart. These rubber pieces here, what they call the rags, they're not always a consistent thickness. So if you've got one that's real thick in one area and you've got it on the outside of the spokes and you've got that thick area, well, guess what? That's going to push that sprocket out in that area. I'm grossly exaggerating here. So you want to make sure when you installed it that what I'll do is compare. I'll try to put my thickest piece of the rag joint on the outside of the spokes and the most consistent one. That's equally important. So if you've got a rag joint, I mean, I've seen some that are 1/4 of an inch or more thicker on one side than they are in the other, and of course you're going to have hell trying to true up your sprocket with that. So keep that in mind. You may want to look behind it and see if you've got a great irregularity there. You're going to have a hard time tightening it up to get it taken care of. So and another thing you want to check and look out for when you put your rear wheel in on your bike is the rear wheel straight. If it's cocked off to one side or the other, well, that's going to throw that sprocket off, and that sprocket needs to be you've got your center line of the bike, and when you have that wheel put on, you want that sprocket to be aligned perfectly parallel to the center of the bike. If it's cocked one way or the other, there you're going to have problems too. So keep that in mind. Okay, you may want to go for a more forgiving chain. The stock 415 chain is a decent chain, but the number 41 roller chain, you can get that, you can get it online. If you want, I can sell it to you. Check the link down below. The number 41 chain is a little bit wider here on the inside, and that'll give you just that little bit more wiggle room when it comes to get things lined up. That may be an option for you too. The job of your chain tensioner is, well, what your chain tensioner is going to do, if it's off one way or the other, it's going to try to feed the chain off to the side, and your sprocket's going to want to roll off to the side. And if your chain is tight enough, you'll hear popping where the sprocket will pop back into the center there, and you'll need to get your tensioner aligned. And I pretty much will do it by eye, but what I will do is, you've got the chain on the sprocket and then you look down, okay? And you want to make sure that your chain isn't doing something like this here. You want to make sure, let's see here, you want to make sure that the top and the bottom of the chain are perfectly aligned with your center line, with your chain line. Okay, so if your bottom chain is being pulled over one way or the other because of your chain tensioner, there's going to be a problem. So as well, if you're having issues with getting your chain tensioner adjusted, check the link down below. I sell a pretty nifty arch style chain tensioner that'll never fall into your spokes. That may help you out, okay? But you can, if you mess with these here will work, but you got to be careful. There is that chance that they could flop into your spokes. So if you have any major problems, you're still not getting it, shoot some video of it. Check out my Facebook group. Post your pics, post video. You know, give us something to look at, and maybe we can help you. Hopefully I can get you on the road. If you think this video helped you, give me a fat thumbs up. Click that subscribe button. There's more to come. Thanks for watching.